On Tuesday at the Sam Malou Foundation, starting at 3:30, from 3:30 to 6, is going to be a wonderful event, free for all. You can come to the Sam Malou Foundation. That's the actual day of her book launch. So we are so fortunate to have this person. She and Scott raised their 4 children in this church, and she is a journalism professor, a journalism and creative writing professor at Chaffey College, and was actually discovered when she submitted an article to the New York Times and had book publishers contact her to tell her amazing story about growing up in the wild, largely unsupervised, except for a very strict religious zealot who happened to be her grandfather, who was the leader of a community that still exists here, between here and Pasadena. Michelle Dowd is an amazing, amazing woman. As I said, a celebrated journalist and professor, and just a lovely people. I have the pleasure of being her friend by just being her yoga student. And so you're all in for a treat. Michelle, welcome.
Thank you all. I was going to hand these, Janice, I was just going to say, you can pass these out to anyone you want. I don't have very many left, but.
There's 3 book launch parties.
Okay. So this is adorable because I don't know why I pictured this around a table. It used to be in that room when we were here all the time for adult education. So I am a little intimidated by podiums. People at my work know that I don't stand at podiums ever. So Patrick knows, like, I was speaking at MIT this summer, honestly, and I said, no, I can't have a podium. But here I am at the podium. I might just stand over here so I can see you guys better. Oh, no, it'll mess up that. Okay, I can do this, yes.
People can see you at home.
Okay, lovely. Am I back on screen? Okay, I'm not gonna look at myself on screen. That just drives me crazy. So as Janice mentioned, Scott and I raised our children here in the church. We came here for many years, and I had the wonderful opportunity to teach church school for many years here. We would take the rotations. I don't know if you still do it this way, but we would do 6-week rotations. And I was here with Butch Henderson and Joyce Kirkmore, and then Eileen when she was here, and Rob Patton. And when I first started doing church school, it intimidated me quite a bit coming from such a strict religion. And I just said very as kindly as I could, I will do this. I'll do it I'll take all the sessions because I have a lot of kids. I'll do my part, but I want to teach world religions, not Christianity. Is that okay? And they were like, yes, that's wonderful, which made me want to join the church, and we did. So our children were also part of the bell choir and all the plays that they used to do here. And they all got confirmed in this church. And our youngest, Zephyr, this is just to give you context. She worked really closely with Eileen, and when she got up to speak about her confirmation in the sanctuary, she said, thank you all for being my community. I want you to know that I'm an atheist, but I love you all and I feel really safe here. And I had no idea she was going to say that. And the wonderful thing, though, is everyone accepted that she said that. And she was 14 and she was just welcomed, and she continued to stay in the youth group and to be part of the high school program and to go on the trips they would always go on. And all my kids counseled at Pilgrim Pines Camp. So they went to the camp and then they became counselors. So we have a long, rich tradition here, and I'm thinking I need to come back. It's so lovely to be here. It really is. And this church community, the reason I'm even here, I mean, I met Jen, Pastor Jen, we are in a moon circle together. But the other reason I'm here is because this is the only faith community that I've ever belonged to that I trust. And that means a lot to me. So even though I don't know most of you, I really believe in the theology and just the spirit of God is still speaking, that, you know, we place a period where God has placed a comma, just all the ways that we can continue to move forward as a community. So very grateful to be here. This book was not a book I really wanted to write, and I still feel very, very nervous about it coming out in the world. The community that I come from is not happy about it, as you can imagine. I believe the community has changed significantly. I hope that it has, but I also know that the people who are running it have also been very, very hostile about this book. So that includes family members of mine. So that's been difficult terrain. I think that all of us probably either have been or know someone who was raised in a really high control group, and the way that that carries over in your life. And when it is part of your family, and for me, my family of origin began this. My mother was born in the cult as well. It was very difficult for me when I wrote this book, when they wanted to put cult on the cover. And I had named it Forager, a Field Guide for Survival. And the editors at the end said, before it went to press, said, no, we're going to change the title. We workshopped it and we're going to change the title. And you may or may not know that when you sell a book, you don't get to control your subtitle. That's part of the packaging. So they created the cover design and that subtitle, which was just really, really difficult for me because we had been instructed never to call it a cult. And now, of course, I recognize that they've done me a favor, because now I'm forced to talk about the parts of it that were particularly hard for me. And I can't get around it because as I do interviews, the word cult always comes out because it's on the cover. So you can judge a book by its cover. I do all the time. And I actually love the way that they designed this cover, the fire of the Bible verses. And it's not an anti-religious book in any way, shape, or form. The Bible, the King James Bible, is the book that I grew up on. And when I was 8 years old, I chose on my own to read it cover to cover, every single word, and mark up the entire Bible. It's the one book I had access to. And I give a lot of credit to having access to the Bible, to being, I don't know, I could read Shakespeare the moment I walked into college, you know, I could do, it gave me a certain degree of love for language and poetry. I foraged for plants, but I also foraged for words, and the Bible is where I found my language and my cadence, I think, my rhythm. And so at the very beginning, the publishers also thought that I have so many Bible verses in the text, even though it's not a religious book per se. But I felt that it was the poetry of my childhood, and it was the language of my childhood. So it is peppered throughout the book with Bible verses that are just going on in my mind. Like every time I see something, and this still happens to me, I think in terms of Bible verses and also hymns, because I grew up on a lot of hymns. So I do want to open for questions. That's kind of the way I prefer to do conversations, is to see what interests you. I know that hardly anyone here has read it. Maybe one person in here has read it. But I will also say that Scott, who's here today, I know he doesn't like to be in the front row, and he's being very gracious to do that. He was not born there like I was, but he did join the cult, so we were both raised there, and he has been an enormous support to me. He is the first person who read after I sent it to my editor. I didn't show anyone while I was writing, and he read it because I wanted to know, before I moved forward with any edits, if he found any inaccuracies or if there's anything that he questioned, and just asked me to rethink. And so he was wonderful about that, and he's been wonderful as a support since. And he is a family member who has not turned his back on this process. So he's no longer in the cult, of course, but thank you, Scott, for your support. I also just want to call out a couple more people who've been so supportive. Janice, obviously, has been such a comfort and reminds me, as I've reminded her, to meditate, to sit in silence, and to find my center. My dear friend, Amy, she is going to be doing the welcome table at the Maluf Foundation. So if you know Amy, check in with her and say hi. And if you don't, absolutely check in and say hi, because she is the face that I want to be at the front of when my people walk in. And Scott Bullender, dear friends from Boy Scouts, all of those years, in addition to church, we did raise our boys together. His older son, his sons, as some of you probably know, his sons, they are the same age as my son and our son. And so we all raised our boys together. So yes, and I miss them, by the way, but I keep up with Chris and his kids online, and yeah. So anyway, the thing I wanted to sort of highlight today is that one of the reasons I wrote the book, besides being asked to write it, is because I've always encouraged students to show up for the things that scare them. And talking about my past, like, still sends like feelings I'm going to hell for like even saying the word cult, or even though I've done the work of therapy and I've done the work of being part of a church community, and I still am a member of this community. I just haven't been here much lately, but I am still a member of this church. It's still very difficult to emotionally separate myself from my past. And so this process of it feels like a coming out, has caused me a great deal of nightmares, and I've had a really difficult time sleeping, and it's caused me, even though the book is doing really well, by the way, it's caused me anxiety. So before I do questions, I will just let you know that Time Magazine is featuring an excerpt on Tuesday. So you can find that online. And then they asked me to also write an update. So I have a piece that's current and a piece of the book that's in Time Magazine this week. And Shondaland will be releasing on Tuesday. And then we've made some lists like Washington Post and LA Times and a few others. So it is getting, from critics, it's getting good reviews. It's just the personal part that's really difficult for me. So thank you all for your support. All right, so what kind of questions, what are you interested in about? Oh, and here's the book. It's called Forager. I think it's on your screen, or it was on your screen. All right. So yeah, what are you interested in? What it was like to, like what the book's about?
Well, I guess the community you were in, right? What your beliefs were, and just
Yeah.
how you're living.
Okay, I'm going to do the short version in 60 to 90 seconds. I'll try this. It's a great question. I need to be prepared for this.
You'll have to repeat the question for the people online.
Oh, the question is, can I give a brief synopsis of the way the community was structured and what it was like growing up in the community? So my grandfather started this organization in 1931. He was a member of Boy Scouts, and then, well, he was a leader of Boy Scouts, and then found Boy Scouts didn't give him the kind of control that he wanted, or I don't know, I wasn't around in 1931, but he did coin the organization in 1931 and started taking boys on his own. So he left Boy Scouts and became a leader of boys. He, of course, did not call himself a cult leader. He went on to meet my grandmother, who was a piano. She was a wonderful musician. And he met her in a church while she was playing piano. Now, in my opinion, and this is not fact, this is opinion, I think that he saw an opportunity to use her music as a way to create an organization, or to further the organization. So they met and married rather quickly, and then they had 5 children. My mom was the 4th and the first girl. So they had 3 boys, and then they had 2 girls, all of which stayed at the organization and worked entirely for their parents. My grandmother was the one who earned the money. She taught piano, and she was very active in the Pasadena Guild, and she raised all her children to be musicians, while her husband raised them to be religious zealots. So by the time I was born with a combination of music and a warrior mentality. So the music was a part of my childhood. My grandmother taught me to play violin and piano very young, and that was really a gift. She had a stroke though when I was 5, and she was never the same after that. So a lot of my training in music came when I was 3 and 4, but it did get inside of me. So at the organization, what they primarily did was it was an all boys organization for many years, and they meaning my grandfather, and then my father joined when he was 12. So he's not biologically related. He came from the East Coast, and his mother left an abusive marriage. She had just 1 child. She didn't tell him where they were going, and they moved to Temple City first. And I believe she said they were living in a chicken shed in the backyard of a friend of hers, and she was hiding from her husband because you couldn't get divorced. That was in the late 40s. And so she was the very first woman to work at a factory. After World War II, she was the only female employee in the factory, and she raised her son, but she was working all the time. So he joined an after school organization that my grandfather was running when he was 12. And just got very connected. So my grandfather became his father figure, and he was raised in the community as he was very athletic, and he was tall, and he sort of became an important leader of my grandfather's. So my grandfather married him off to his oldest daughter, and that's the family that I was born into. My father was also drafted into the Army, and that was very unexpected because, the draft was something that people couldn't avoid, and the cult thought they could avoid it, but they couldn't. So he was also got real military training in the Army. And then he brought, and that was long before I was born. And by the time I was born, I'm the second of 4 children that were born in 5 years. And we were very poor because the cult relied on people giving up their families to come, but they didn't let people work on the outside if they were in the very center of the organization. So neither of my parents had jobs outside, so we didn't really have anything. And my grandfather tried to hide like who his children were, so he was very against nepotism, and everybody in the organization called him grandpa. So I did not know that he was biologically related to me for a long time. All the children who were born there, we all called him grandpa. And by the time I did figure that out, it was just very confusing. My uncles too, I didn't know they were biologically related to me. Instead of going by their last name, they all went by Mr. first names, like Mr. Ork, Mr. Philip, Mr. Francis. And I also did not know, I didn't call them uncle for a long time because I didn't know. So we were just raised collectively in that sense. My mom sort of handed off her babies when they were about 2 days old into a group. Unfortunately, my grandmother was working all the time, so she couldn't help raise us. And we were just raised by mostly whoever happened to have time. I mean, I've talked to a few people who were like, yeah, we just put you in the corner, or whatever. You know, it was just sort of, you know, some of the women who were there who had children were able to raise their children, but my mom was the founder's daughter, and she was very, very busy running the organization with her father, I guess you could say. So that was longer than I expected, and I don't think I covered anything like what it was really like to be born there. But I will say that, and this is in the book, when I was 7, we became homeless because we had nowhere to live, and we were going on these proselytizing trips all the time across the United States for generally 8 or 10 weeks at a time, and sometimes back to back. Like we'd go 8-week trip and then we'd go on a 10-week trip. And I started going on these when I was very young, and we'd go to Mexico and we'd proselytize there, and we'd sleep on the dirt and do all that stuff. And during that particular summer when I was 7, the camper we were like, I wasn't in the camper at the time, but it caught on fire. My little brother was in it. He barely got out. Our dog burned up and all our belongings burned up. And so by the time we were in Indiana at the time, by the time we got back to Southern California, we had nothing. And I'd been wearing the same clothes for weeks. And then we moved up to a mountain in Angeles National Forest, which my grandfather had leased during the 40s, the 1940s. And so this was in the late 70s. And we moved up there, and it was just our nuclear family briefly. And then we would take strays in who were not necessarily performing well at the organization to kind of reprogram them. And so we always had men living with us after that. And I lived there for 10 years. It was pretty much an empty camp, and we were supposed to be developing it. I mean, it was empty of people, but it also didn't really have, it had one room, a mess hall. And so we just all like, and we used an outhouse that we would hike to and that kind of thing. So that is also part of the story, is that we ended up on a mountain, and the mountain was owned by the cult, but the cult didn't, would just take it as like they would go to do spiritual training up on the mountain, and we were there for that. That's, again, not a short version, but that's kind of the gist of it. So that's, the book starts when we move to the mountain, and it ends, you'll have to read it and find out. Obviously, I made it out. Yes, Janice.
You learned to forage as a young person. How do you use some of our native plants now in your cooking or teas or whatever?
So that was a really fun part of the book, is revisiting and picking the plants. Oh, the question, how did, I was raised to forage. Part of what we did on the mountain, my mom became an expert in this. We learned to eat off of the land. And so each chapter of the book has a native edible plant as the chapter title. And then I give kind of a field note of my experience with it. Now, I believe these notes are accurate, but we are very clear at the beginning of the book that you should not follow my instructions to eat the edible plants, that you should get more professional advice before you go foraging, which I would recommend whether you read this book or not. Always, know what you're eating. But for me, because I was raised that way, it was fairly easy to go back and start picking, as I was doing research for the book, go back and play with all these plants to kind of remind myself. I also read, my mother passed away last year, and my dad didn't care at all about her books, and neither did any of my siblings. They're like, whatever. And so I was very fortunate to be able to take with me all my mom's books and all her notes. And I was able to use that as reference material too, which is honestly fantastic. I also went up to the mountain before she died, and she knew I did this. She hadn't given any of us the materials when she left the mountain, but she had left them all there. And so I went up there to retrieve them, and I have officially borrowed them, and I'm supposed to return them. So we'll see when I do that. But right now I have all the notes that my mom left there too. So she started teaching survival training. And that's one of the reasons we learned to eat off the land, is because it's something that she taught other children or other young people as well. And the purpose, I mean, she had more than one purpose, but the one that I'm discussing mainly is that when the apocalypse came and there was a great reign of terror, that we would be able to survive on the mountain eating the plants, and we wouldn't have to rely on, money or trade or anything else, and that we'd be able to survive when the world fell apart. So some plants, for example, since you asked, elderberries, and that's something that I've noticed has become sort of popular during COVID, a lot of tinctures and things. So you should always boil your elderberries. If you develop a sort of adjustment to it, and well, we won't even get into that. There's a lot of things you can do with elderberries, but when you cook them, they melt into kind of a syrup, and you can add sugar and literally make a syrup, or you can use it to make tea. Or you can just even dry the elderberries and put them in tea, because then it'll like seep. But you can also use it just to make compotes and different things. And it's really high in vitamin C, among other things. Yerba Santa was something that we used to chew on quite a bit. And that's all over our local mountains, even like in Mount Baldy, so like up here fairly close. We would use like choke cherries and gooseberries. I also go into how to use pine nuts and acorns. And well, there's a lot of, I don't even know all my plants. Well, lichen I talk about, which is less edible, but is edible. Yucca, which is now protected in our mountains, so don't pick it, but it is all around. But we used to pull back and eat yucca, and eat the larvae that the yucca moths eat inside of the yucca plant. So the flowers are edible, and also the stems. And so when I was doing this book, I was looking at the actual plants we ate, and then I was using them as metaphors for some of the emotional content of my childhood as well. And something that has been very positive, I think, in my life is that I've understood the interconnectedness of nature in a really fundamental way. And my mom really was, she was very stern in many ways, but she had a true interest, and I want to say love, of plants. She has no degrees in botany, but she was obsessed with it. And she became president of the San Gabriel Interpretive Society, and she would lead nature tours. And anyone that I've talked to who knew her in that context just seriously thought she was a genius. She was really, really well educated, self-educated in the topic of plants. So when we were eating the plants, we also learned just a lot about the identification and how they got pollinated. And I'm sure you all know a lot more than I knew, because I didn't have traditional education, but it is amazing some of the actual intricacies necessary to pollinate flowers. I mean, it's incredible. There's with the yucca, this one moth has to pollinate it. And so there's just a lot of intricacy that goes into that. And it makes you, I think, fundamentally understand what we're doing to our world when we allow monocultures instead of ecosystems and biodiversity. So instead of having a diverse biome, we start trying through our agriculture to try to narrow things down, and even thinking that you can propagate trees that are all one type as a monoculture is just really destructive to the earth and our ecosystem. So that is implied throughout the book as well. I'm giving really long answers, and I don't know the time, so someone's going to have to give me a 5-minute warning. Yes.
Old school superintendent here. I'm really interested in your transition out of that whole experience and ending up at Pitzer.
Right.
Oh, yes. Remind me your name.
I'm Donna.
Donna?
Yeah.
Hi, Donna.
And I'm just so interested if you can talk at all about the pluses and minuses and the trauma or delight and what that whole transition was about.
So those of you who don't know, the reason I ended up in Claremont, so the question is, how did I transition from a non-traditional education to coming to college at the Claremont colleges? So I was 17, and I am giving away the ending a little. I was 17 when I entered Pitzer, and I moved into the dorms here. And I truly credit Pitzer for giving me not only a traditional education, which they did and prepared me to teach. I mean, I started teaching college when I was 21. Pitzer gave me incredible gifts. But the thing that I really admire about Pitzer is they didn't care that I wasn't traditionally educated. And Pitzer also welcomed my curiosity. And so when I came here, I took some tests, right at the beginning, and they're like, oh, you don't have to take writing, you don't have to take math, just take classes you want to take. And that was just such a bizarre thing. And so I started with things like music and theater, and I was doing welding over in the theater over here at Garrison. And I just did a lot of hands-on things. I took modern dance. I just kind of wanted to discover a little bit about, I didn't really want to go into the academic topics at first. I wanted to be a lawyer, and I wanted to, that's what I intended to do when I first got here. And I wanted to break apart communities that were hurting children. And I still very much believe in that. But when I went to a lawyer's kind of Pitzer hosted, like, what was it like to go to law school? And they brought him in a bunch of lawyers, and it was over in the McConnell dining room. And the women were all wearing nylons and pumps and like these suit jackets. And I literally just, I couldn't breathe. Like, I can't do that. Like, I just can't do that. So it was really the clothing that kept me from going to law school. And it is also, so truthfully, I didn't apply to Pitzer. Pitzer sent me an acceptance without me applying. And then they invited me to come visit, and not everyone, but a lot of the students were barefoot, and that gave me a great sense of comfort. And so I think that's why I came to Pitzer, is because I saw barefoot students. And then also because I got wonderful financial funding, and no one in the administration or faculty members ever made me feel like a pariah. Now, that being said, it was very difficult for me to connect to other students. And I had a very, very, very difficult time in the dorms. I didn't understand people my age. I didn't have connection with popular music of our culture, or movies or television, or the things that young people care about. I'd never had alcohol, which I actually graduated from college without ever tasting alcohol. Everyone was smoking. There was a lot of pot. I had never seen any of that. And I know a lot of people just go like straight for what has been forbidden, but I was so scared that I was going to be alone and impoverished my entire life that I just felt very committed to learning everything I could. So I did not spend time socializing. I just went straight into talking to professors and to telling them, I don't know what you're talking about, and asking for their help. And I was very, very fortunate that professors took me under their wing, and I'm still close to them to this day. And that was true at Pitzer, but also at Scripps. I became very close to a professor at Scripps, and we're still close to this day. So that was what I was able to do, is to talk to other adults. And I wasn't an adult, but talk to people who were adults. And Pitzer just encouraged me to find what I found interesting. And I was obsessed. Like, I was reading everything. I think that, I was working as a house cleaner. I was doing a lot of that, and I started tutoring a lot of teenagers in the community. So I worked other jobs too. My goal was to get out of college without any debt, and to not drown in poverty, which has happened. So I'm very grateful. Yeah.
Tell us about how you educated yourself between when you were born and Pitzer. How does one test out of classes when you didn't have any formal schooling?
Well, I didn't have any formal schooling on the outside. My mother, who was really, really intelligent, as I mentioned, she also began a school, so like a one-room schoolhouse at this organization that the cult called The Field. And so it wasn't, there were different times during that time period, but my dad was a lot smarter than anyone gave him credit for too. And he did math in his head. So I'm just gonna give an example. Like if we were cutting something or building something, he would get really angry if I didn't know fractions or decimals, or and we would measure. And I learned a lot of geometry from building, and I learned a lot of math from astronomy, which my uncle taught me the stars. And so there was a lot of stuff, and my dad especially wouldn't let us write anything down. It had to be in our head. So I'm still to this day really good with numbers in my head. I can do math quickly, and I know it's like very, very grateful. And so some of that was just, I remember my dad too, if I asked how to spell a word, he'd get really angry. He said, you know how to spell it, figure it out. I don't know if he didn't know how to spell the words, or if he just really thought that's the best way to learn. I don't know, but And then my mom, once her father died, so when I was a teenager, she actually went about starting a school, and I was part of the beginning of all that. And it is accredited now. My mom's not here anymore, but she did become principal of the school, and she did put together that. Now, it was not a traditional school. Like, it wasn't like you would, there was no teachers like that were trained to be teachers. There was just people at the organization who would teach you a lot of Bible and stuff. But you can learn a lot from Bible stories, and you can learn a lot, especially if you're asking yourself questions about these stories, because I was putting together cultural history. And actually, when I first got to Pitzer, I took a world history through world religions course. And a world history through religion, I think is the name of the course. And it was amazing because I could understand history through religion. And I'm just like thrilled that there was such a class. Greenberger taught it, if anybody knows. I know he passed away, but he was at Pitzer for 40 years at least. Yes.
No.
Oh, you know him? How long ago? He did pass away, right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. He was wonderful. He took that class, was just phenomenal. So, I mean, I was really motivated to understand the Bible because that is what they used to explain everything. And at a very young age, I found there was a lot of contradictions. And so I'd ask a lot of questions. And when they wouldn't answer those questions, I would cross-reference. And then I got a hold of a concordance. And then I could use the language. And I was really literally drawing maps of like words and characters. And like, I mean, maybe people don't call them characters, but the characters in the Bible, and trying to figure out the history and when things were really written. And then when I went to graduate school in Boulder, Colorado, I took graduate work in religion and religious studies too. And that really helped answer. So like now I'm looking at a different perspective, is that I was doing the work that graduate students do at a very young age. I mean, I wasn't able to come up with the conclusions they come up with, but I was able to ask those kinds of questions. So in the book, I try very hard not to give a sophisticated point of view, but I give the point of view of a child who is piecing it together. So you're walking through her journey like that. And so I think you get kind of educated with her. So like with the plants, I'm not coming from a science perspective, I'm coming from an experiential perspective. And I don't know, but at the time I was at Pitzer, experiential education was really emphasized and encouraged. And so it was just a really good fit for me. Yes.
You went through just an amazing journey. What are the parts of the community that you miss the most? And what are the parts of the community that you were really relieved to get away from?
The question is, what do I miss about being in a cult, and what am I really glad to be away from? Nobody who's in a cult thinks they're in a cult. I think that is categorically true, whether you consider the inner workings of Mormonism or Scientology or anything else culty. The people inside do not consider it culty. So I've talked to many people who have come out of even Hasidic Jews who feel that their particular community was a form of a cult. Anyone who I know who's come out of a system that has been defined as a cult will say the level of community you get there is something that's impossible to replicate anywhere else. Like, we slept together, we ate together, we sang together, and we were like pack animals, we would like pile on top. I didn't sleep alone, like I do miss that. And I guess maybe one of the reasons I had so many children is like, I missed having just bodies around me that had the same sense of purpose. And while I don't agree with the purpose that we had, I did really appreciate learning how to work as a collective. And that's probably served me in teaching as well, because I do a lot of, I run student media. And so like, working with the students on their newspaper, on their, podcasts and all those things, like understanding that, humans thrive when they are in collaboration. And I know we know that intellectually, but when you really experience that, which I'm sure everyone's experienced it at some point, a cult really gives you the sense of that. And it's really hard to find people who are as committed to anything as you find in a cult. So, again, messed up, but it's comforting at the time, and it's hard to replicate. I'm really glad to be away from the rigidity. My sister, who is still there, she believes that you can keep people safe by keeping things strict and by maintaining control. And that was very hard on me as a child, but there's a great deal of control. Like, I mean, when we were young, you had to eat exactly measured food, you know, if you could get food, but like it had to be like, it was all controlled. We had to get, when I was a teenager, we were being weighed every day. We were running to a timer. We were like, you know, doing tons of training. And the idea is that if you could control your body and you could be 100% in control, like you never had desire, like, but instead you just like maintain efficiency, that you would not sin. And there was just so much, they really truly believed that when you reach salvation, you would never sin again. And so anybody who even committed a mistake had to cover it up, basically. I mean, they covered up inside themselves, like everyone compartmentalized. And so I feel like I really was raised to deny that I ever did anything wrong, or just to hide any thoughts I would have that were impure or any actions. And so that is something I'm just really grateful to be out of a system that encourages that kind of deception, it's self-deception and community deception. And I don't think that people realize how much you have to lie to yourself if you have to believe that you can't ever commit even a sin in thought. Like they were very against thought sin. And so they wanted to control literally your thoughts. And you had to keep track of every single thing you did. Like when you were in training for leadership, you had to write down every single place that you were ahead of time that you were gonna do. And then if you veered from it for even like 1 minute or 3 minutes, you had to write it down and say what happened, that you didn't make it to that thing exactly at the right time. And you also were not allowed to earn money, you know, everything was, and if you did, it had to go all to the organization. It was very, very controlled. And I think for me, that level of rigidity was just mind-numbing. It was really difficult. Yes, Patrick.
How did that stern upbringing impact both your ethic and your style as a teacher and as a writer?
So this is my dear friend Patrick, who was a student of mine for many years. I mean, I don't know if it was on and off, yeah, for many years. And I was at his Pitzer graduation, so that was a joy. He's a new resources student, and just happy to have him as here today and as part of this church. The question is, how did the stern upbringing influence my teaching ethic and my writing ethic? So I have a really difficult time with structure to this day. I do work in an academic institution and I am tenured and I have had to follow a lot of rules to get there. So I do know how to do it, but I resist it. I really don't like it. And I like, I have to have a syllabus that has structure. I would prefer not to give students grades because I really think it interferes with their learning. I really, truly believe that. But in my job, I have to give grades because that's a requirement of the institution so that the students can go on and get degrees, right? So I've been teaching in the prisons, the women's prison and men's prison in Chino as well, and I have to give them grades. And all I really want to do is like get them excited about learning because I think that's what education should be about. So it influences in the sense of I do come up with a point structure and I have everything outlined and I'm like this. And to this day, I have not, knock on wood, ever had a student complaint about a grade because I'm clear about what they expect. And I do that so that I can like then back off and not worry about their grades, you know? So like, here's the system. This is how you earn the grade you want to earn in this class. It's up to you. It's not up to me. I'm not deciding your value. You're deciding how much you want to put into this course. And if you do the things, you know, you show up for yourself. I do a lot of student presentations, and that's something I learned at Pitzer is that, at least back in the day, I remember I took this class on understanding the Russians, and Professor Marquis, he made us do oral examinations. We had to go to his office and explain like the Politburo and it was really challenging for me because I'd never been asked what I think about anything. And he would ask about the, you know, the political systems. And so when I still to this day do oral examinations with my students, I have them present material, not all my students, but the ones who get into some of the advanced classes, they have to do an exit interview and they have to tell me in person. And I do it in, you know, in the classroom, but I do it one-on-one. So they will have an appointment and then I'll ask them questions and I'll ask them what are the biggest mistakes you've made? What did you learn from those mistakes? How are you going to apply it in the future? And I always have it worked into the point total that if a student doesn't do something, but they can explain why they didn't and what they learned from procrastinating or doing whatever, that as long as they can write something up that tells me what they did instead and why that was more valuable, that I'll accept it. And I mean, they do have to do that work, but I think that's more valuable, that work. I feel like we're almost out of time because you probably wouldn't be walking in looking so,
You've got 5 minutes.
okay, 5 minutes.
10 minutes.
Yes.
What about the impact on your children and trying to be parents and after that?
The impact on my children. Well, I have been careful, and I'll just say this, I've been careful in my interviews so far not to discuss the details of my children. I know this isn't really a public interview, but I'm going to be still a little bit careful about this. I will say, I am being recorded. I will say that all my children, as I mentioned, who were raised here, there's only 4 of them. It's not like there's 12, but they are all doing very well. They all have college educations. They all have careers. They all have partners. And 2 of my daughters are married, and one of them has a son with her husband. And so I am a grandma, which is wonderful. So I'm just not going to tell you all the details of their lives. We joined this church because I wanted them to trust other adults. And one of the fears that I was always taught is that outsiders are scary, dangerous, and you should lie to them. And you should, like, I was taught to lie to authority all the time. You know, if a police officer tried to stop us, whatever, we had stories we were supposed to tell. And so I wanted my kids to be raised. They did go to public schools. 3 of them graduated from Claremont High and 1 from Altaloma. And then my son who was in the Boy Scout troop, they met here at the church. Jim Martin was his leader, is amazing, and Carrie Martin, and you know, Zach, along with everything. And my daughters went on like most of the trips, and even when I didn't go, Scott would take them with the girls on the trips with the boys. And so what I wanted as a parent was for my children to feel like they knew they could trust people outside of me. And if I did something that they didn't like, that they could go to somebody and talk about it. And that held me accountable too. I didn't want to be the sole authority on anything. And we also raised them, and I know this was a huge ethic of mine, to not push in their education about their grades. I tried really hard. I don't know if I even tried. I just felt really committed to not ever rewarding any of my kids for a grade and never disciplining them for not turning in anything, but to only care about whether they were respectful and kind in the classroom to their teachers and to other students, and also that they were excited about learning, even if they weren't excited about learning at school. So if they were at home excited about learning, that was fine. They all got through college in 4 years. They all, like, it was all that was very easy for them. And so that is something I feel like I took with me. It was just like, it really doesn't matter all the structure. What matters is that you find something inside of you that you love. Now that being said, they also had to learn to follow rules. They went to, you know, public school, and I didn't do that. And at Claremont High, my son was co-captain of the speech and debate team, for example, and 2 of my kids were national merit scholars there. So they did the things, but they didn't do it because I asked them to. They were getting whatever guidance they were other places. And at this particular church, it was just so important to us that the kids were in bells and everything that they were doing, that we were not micromanaging, but that we were like saying, you can trust Charlotte, you can trust Georgia, you can trust Joyce, you can trust Pastor Butch, you know, and if there's something that you don't feel you can trust, you can tell me. And if I do something you don't feel, you can tell them. You should talk about the things that are not working in your life. I would say that the thing that I probably now would have done different with the kind of work that I didn't have time to work on myself because I had children very young, and I kind of grew up with them, and I now feel that I probably didn't give them access to emotional language. I didn't help them understand their feelings. I did help them understand that there's safe people, and I understand they did well. But I think now one of our daughters is a marriage and family therapist, and she reminds me that I didn't tell her how to talk about her feelings. And she's right, I did not, because I wasn't talking about my feelings. And I was perhaps not vulnerable enough with my children because I didn't know what that looked like. I had never been vulnerable. And I feel like I am now, but no, I wish I had been when they were young. Yes.
A quick answer. What are your favorite comparative religion authors?
So when I teach comparative literature, I pretty much teach the actual text, like even just teaching like Confucius or Gilgamesh or whatever, teaching like, it's been a while. I mean, I actually brought the Quran in here and showed the students, the young people, the difference and the similarities between the Muslim faith and the Christian faith. I mean, Muslims are a form of Christian, but you know, difference between Protestants and Catholics and Muslims, and then like even the subsets of like Mormonism. But I feel like I always go to the original texts to, even with young kids, just to show them and give them the context of when it was written. So I'm trying to think of, it has been a while since I've taught world religions, to be honest. Do you have one that you like? You want to recommend one?
I think, is it Carol Anderson?
I mean, I was reading a lot of women like Rosemary Radford Ruther, but I wasn't assigning that to other people. And I was reading, Teresa de Lauretis does kind of break it down a little bit with deconstructionism in religion. I was reading women on religion more than anything else in my graduate work. And then when I was teaching it, I just wasn't bringing in texts like that to, you know, 10-year-olds or 15-year-olds for that matter. One of my daughter's husbands grew up in this church as well, and he used to assist me when he was like 12 and 13 in the classroom of the world religions here before she met him. I mean, I guess she probably met him through me. She's just a tad younger. And so that is also something really beautiful because he has very positive memories of this church as well. If you want to give me some texts, I'd be super interested in reading them if I haven't already.
Can we do one more question, Michelle?
Last question. All right, well then I'll just use this opportunity to close by saying that we are having the opening party at the Salmon Alfreda Maluf Foundation this Tuesday. And while it's 3:30 to 6, I'm leading a guided meditation, super gentle yoga, meaning just like I'm gonna be wearing a dress and like it's not gonna be, you know, no mats, nothing like that. And we are going to have a Q&A, and the woman who's doing the Q&A with me is a reporter at the LA Times, and she is a former student of mine from Chaffey College in journalism. And so I'm really proud of her work. And so she'll be doing the Q&A at 5 o'clock. So if you just have like a few minutes to pop in, 5 o'clock is a great time to stop by.
And I just wanted to say thank you, Michelle, but before we applaud her, if you would buy her book, and there are people who are planning 1-star reviews between here and Pasadena because of where she came from. So anytime you can put some 5 stars, buy her book anywhere, that would be appreciated.
Only if you like it.
Only if you like it.